Good morning, everyone. Please continue enjoying your breakfast and welcome to today's Fridays at Findlay. Let's give a round of applause to our sponsors, Premier Bank, loyal supporters of the university in many ways, and in particular of this series for a number of years. So thank you, Premier Bank. I wore blue for you today. I want some points for that. But I also want to remind you that next month, April 19th, we'll have that month's Fridays at Findlay. So please come back to hear one of our own graduates, Brian Nash, who's senior executive with Ingredient, a Fortune 500 food ingredients company. Brian will tell us about the company's efforts in food safety, advances in food safety, as well as sustainability. So you won't want to miss that. But today, we're all about birds. Also, thank you all for your support of the university in so many ways, all of you in the audience. I know a number of you, some of you are new, and we welcome you to our campus. But most of you are longtime supporters of our university. And I want to remind you, and so that you can remind your friends, that on March 21st, we'll have Day of Giving for this spring. And we expect it to be one of the very best and most exciting days of giving that we've had. And you won't want to miss being a part of that. So thank you. Keep that in mind. It'll be a fun day. There may be prizes. Not promising, not telling you what they are, but there could be prizes. So at this time, I'm going to ask our student from our College of Health Professions student, Katie Freilich, to come forward, offer a few words of reflection, and begin our morning in prayer. Then Vice President Kenneth McIntyre, Vice President of University Advancement, will introduce our distinguished guest, and you are in for a treat. Katie?
Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see so many of your bright, shining faces this morning. I know it's a little bit early. So my name is Katie Freilich, and I'm a junior here in our College of Health Professions. I'm studying nursing, and then I will go on to earn my doctorate in occupational therapy here after graduating with my BSN. And when I'm not studying, you'll find me involved in many different organizations here on campus. I help lead a co-ed Bible study on Monday nights with the campus ministry. I give tours from the Office of Admissions. I help lead the new student orientation, and I'm a member of some different student organizations like the Student Nurses Association and Students of Occupational Therapy Association. I have had a blast playing on a team in our annual intramural sand volleyball tournament, and I've also gotten to go caroling with other students at Christmas time. The University of Findlay has given me an opportunity to passionately pursue my interests and grow in my relationship with God. I know I would not be the same person if I'd chosen to attend a different school, and I truly believe that attending the University of Findlay was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I know that I and my peers will be prepared, like many of the classes that have come before us, to give back to others while also leading a meaningful life and having a productive career. Would you guys bow your heads and may we pray together? Dear Lord, thank you for this morning and for the opportunity that you've given us to gather together this morning. Lord, please bless the faculty and the students at the University of Findlay as we seek to glorify you in our work, our studies, and our interactions with others. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and learn and grow. I ask that you bless our learning, our service, and bless our growth this year. Lord, we thank you for the countless blessings you've given us. Thank you for the food you've put before us, Lord. Please bless it to our bodies, bless those who prepared it, and be with us throughout the rest of this morning and weekend. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, I asked Dr. Lotta how she would like me to do the introductions today, and she put a nice little sheet for me together that I can read off to you, but I was hoping that I could just stand up in here and wing it. But thank you. The speaker's got it. Thank you. All right. We are so pleased to have you here today to speak with two extremely knowledgeable individuals who are here to tell us about birds and the upcoming annual Biggest Week in American Birding. Kimberly Kaufman, serves as the executive director of the Black Swamp Bird Observatory. Her passion for birds developed in the 1990s when she was monitoring nesting bald eagles for the Ohio Division of Wildlife, that she began binding migrant songbirds for the Black Swamp Bird Observatory, hereby known as BSBO for the rest of the introduction. She played a key role in starting the biggest week in American birding, which was rapidly becoming one of the largest birding festivals in the Americas. She also is a contributing editor to Birds and Blooms magazine and co-author of several nature guides, and received the American Birding Association prestigious award, the Chandler Robbins Award. Also with us today is Mark Shieldcastle, who is commonly referred to as Ohio's Birdman. He spent 32 years with the as a wildlife biologist for the Ohio Division of Wildlife, specializing in avian research. Mark was a founding member of the BSBO and currently serves as their director of research. He has conducted extensive research on bald eagles, wetland breeding birds, waterfowl, migrating raptors, passerines, and a number of other birds. Mark is also the author or co-author of numerous publications and governmental plans regarding wildlife habitat as a part of the Clean Water Act, and regional plans of Partners in Flight. He also developed a recovery plans for the bald eagle, osprey, the common tern, the black-crowned night heron, that's quite a name for a bird, and the sandhill crane. Following their presentation, Mark and Kim's presentation, PowerPoint, they will also be led in a guided discussion by Dr. Marshallada. Kim and Mark, the floor is yours.
Good morning. It's a beautiful facility here. We're going to kind of do a two-parter thing here. First, I'm going to start out with probably a bird that gets people more familiar with this bird than any other bird around. I mean, it's our national symbol. And a lot of people, that's how they get into birding in the first place. And I'm going to do kind of a case study, ecosystem conservation of really what went on with this species that was on the brink of basically extirpated from the state just really 30 years ago. Let's make that about 50 years ago. I keep forgetting how long I've been in the field. And then I'll turn that over to Kim, and she's going to go into the biggest week in American birding and how birding is now becoming a major part of the economy and just the thought process in the region here. So here's going to be a quick run through the bald eagle. It's their largest bird, really, in this part of the country. Only the California condor is bigger in size, about a 7-foot wingspan. Only weighs about 10 to 12 pounds, but it's so iconic, especially the adult bird with the white head. It's on so many of our governmental pamphlets and everything else. Pretty much everybody knows a bald eagle. They may have not realized when they see one, and it wasn't that long ago that in Ohio it was very hard to see one. Now I don't think there's any place in Ohio that you can't see a bald eagle. They have made just a tremendous comeback. Age was very important. We started the restoration program for the bald eagle in 1979. We were down to 4 breeding pairs in the state, all in the western basin of Lake Erie, in the marshes. They were also the last bald eagles of the Great Lakes. They had all disappeared from all the other states. So Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota had strong inland populations, but their birds in the Great Lakes had disappeared. And it was kind of twofold: habitat and major contaminant issues that were occurring starting in the 40s. But age was important because everybody knows a white-headed bird, which is the adult plumage of a bald eagle. But you see a lot of other birds out there that are dark and may not even realize, yeah, that's bald eagle too. In this picture here, it'd be your top left is what would be classified now as a 2-year-old, because all birds get a birthday on January 1, so it was born last year. All dark bird, dark bill, dark eyes. The bird to its right is a 3-year-old. It's kind of a two-tone brown-headed bird. And the bottom left corner is a 4-year-old, which is now turning to more of a white and brown head. Same with the tail. The 3-year-old, the tail is brown with white spots. The 4-year-old is a white tail with brown spots. And in 5 to 6 years is when they become the white-headed bird. What wasn't known really very well until really we started the restoration program, that 3-year-old and that 4-year-old are capable of breeding. And they actually made up all new pairs in the state of Ohio between 1979 and 2000. Were made with these young birds. It was an expanding population. There weren't any adult birds around. And so it was very important that they became breeders earlier on, because it's still a problem that bald eagles don't live as long as they used to due to contaminants. It was a 4-prong approach. One was fostering. We had 4 breeding pairs left, but they couldn't hatch eggs. Due to the contaminant loading, primarily everybody's heard of DDT. DDT, you could probably drink like water. It's what DDT breaks down to, DDD and DDE. That is death on biological systems. So it was a very complicated thing. In the background, really not known until the DDT issue started getting cleaned up, was probably a more insidious group of chemicals, the PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which is industrial pollutants. These things have massive, not only lethal effects, but sublethal effects and generational effects. So the adult may be okay, but their kids have problems. And so fostering, by taking captive bird young, which there was 4 facilities in the country, 3 here in Ohio that had bald eagles in captivity, any young raised, we were given the opportunity to get those birds into a wild nest. The adults were great parents, they just couldn't hatch their own eggs. So fostering was very important. About 20% of all the eagles raised in the 1980s were birds we put in the nest. Second was looking at rehabilitation. You know, if one of these 8 birds that are left go down, you know, we can get it while it's still alive and get it rehabilitated, get back in the wild is very important. And also, nest trees were a problem at that time, so the nest would go down and the young survived. We would make artificial structures to put these birds up so the adults can continue to take care of them. Nests, as I said, were a real problem. You know, the trees that hold a nest that can weigh between 500 and 2,000 pounds don't exist much anymore. You know, the ash, the hickory, the oak, the sycamore, American elm was very important, have all disappeared for multiple reasons, logging, Dutch elm disease. Of course, now we've got the ash problem. But nesting situation became very problematic for the bald eagle, finding a large enough tree that could hold this massive nest. Into the point where we had a kind of unusual situation. This is the Killdeer Plains wildlife area just to your east here. Of a nest actually being a goose tub being used by bald eagles as a nesting structure. So whenever we had a territory that did not have a good tree, we'd build artificial nest structure. And we had to build them like a bald eagle would, because bald eagles have never been able to take into artificial things for a long time. They just now are starting to do that. Ospreys, golden eagles do. Ospreys will use things that are still moving, because they've been known to nest on barges on the East Coast that are moving up and down rivers. Doesn't matter to them. But a bald eagle is always particular. If you had one board or you had one piece of wire, they may not use it. So we had to build it like them, and you get a lot of appreciation for these birds. When it take an entire crew of 2 people up in the tree and people on the ground, of lifting up limbs, and you spending all day and getting about 1 foot to 2 foot a nest in, and these birds are going to add another 2 feet before they use it. And I had the luxury of seeing one nest tree up in Ottawa County, the first twig that went into that nest, and in 2 weeks they were on eggs. So they can build nests very fast, and you know, a 3 to 4 foot deep nest. The fourth part was education, just educating people to the importance of this bird, its protection. It's the most protected bird in the world. 3 federal acts governing at that time, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which has all migratory birds, the Endangered Species Act, because it was listed as an endangered species, and third, what was known then as the Bald Eagle Act of 1940, now it's the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, is the most protective act that's ever been written for wildlife anywhere in this world. In the attempt to take is to harass. If you disturb a bird, you have violated federal law. And so it's extremely strong. Doesn't mean you're going to get arrested for it, but that potential is there. But the volunteer program, which Kim was part of at the beginning, we could not have done this recovery without them, because they were eyes and ears. When there was 4 nesting pair, Division of Wildlife staff could monitor nests, but when there was 100, it wasn't possible. And so volunteers literally spent hours and hours watching their nests. They would be assigned nests, and all they had to do is at least get out at least once a week. Some of them were out there every day. I swear there were certain eagles that couldn't have sneezed on the nest that somebody didn't record, because it just really involved. I think at the time we had around 200 volunteers. At that point in time, it was the largest volunteer program the state had ever had. And so it really took off. And then getting public out to public bandings. We do public bandings, because by that age, this is a really robust bird. You know, it can take a lot of punishment. Even though endangered and all that kind of stuff, it really did take a lot. And getting the public out to see this bird up close changes minds. I mean, I think the most we had people was 300 show up at one banding down in Delaware. So there was this public interest. Entire school classes would come out. And the final part was getting our elected officials. And some of you may recognize this individual, because he's been a very big supporter of bald eagles in Ohio. But getting elected officials out, getting their hands dirty. This being, I think he was senator, state senator then, Bob Latta, and Governor Taft, coming to one of our bandings, and we put them to work. So it's kind of fun, kind of twisting things around there a little bit. But getting them to understand the value, they were there for our support as well. And it really was a major success story. This is one of the greatest success stories we've had in wildlife. You know, in 1979, 4 breeding pair, all up in the Lake Erie marshes. By 89, we were starting to see a little bit of expansion to the northeast in the Pymatuning, Mosquito Creek area. By 99, they were starting to go downstate, following the big river systems. By 2008, which was when I retired and kind of brought to the end of the recovery program, they were really starting in southeast Ohio. The map that would show today, in 2024, is every county has bald eagle nests now in Ohio. Over 900 nests. And we had 4 just 40 years ago. You know, let's really think about that. You know, here's a bird that, you know, was almost lost and has made this massive comeback. If we put our minds to it, we can make a difference. Some of the work we did in the early 90s of actually putting radio transmitters on all the young raised in the Lake Erie marshes. We learned things about what the habitat they needed. We had a habitat problem. These youngsters, as they fledged and got independent from adults, did not tolerate humans. Adult learns what they can do. You know, they can accept a lot of things, these young wouldn't. So it really meant we had a habitat problem. We had a bottleneck of potential. Disease would become much more important if all of your young going to one place. We had to be worried about that, had to be prepared for that. So that was a very important learning thing. And contaminants were still with us. This is a bird actually came out of a nest in Erie, Michigan, right on Lake Erie, right across the border from Toledo. Both parents were Ohio banded birds. It's a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and their first young was a crossbill. And this was a terminal deformity. This bird was actually taken out of the nest when I was invited up with the Fish and Wildlife Service when we got the bird, and it was deemed, it's not going to survive. Let's take it in. The Michigan State University took it in to try to feed it clean food resources, hoping to see can this be arrested. But as that bird grew, the bill continued to cross and to the point it was going to break the lower jaw. And so it just showed that, you know, this is a second generational effect from PCBs. And so contaminants are still there. They're background now. They're not acute as they were 30, 40 years ago. But it's always something, what's the next thing we have to worry about? And of course, that's generally disease. Here's an example taking blood from one of the youngs. We took blood from every bird that we banded, had it run to see what the contaminant loading was. Is there any odd things in disease? And of course, now the new thing that's up, it's occurred in the last couple of years, was the mutation to the new avian influenza, H5N1, high path avian influenza, which never before, because wild birds are carriers of avian influenza. Poultry is a massive danger sign. And that's really where our biggest concern of avian influenza. Avian influenza can become a human influenza, but it has to pass through something else, generally pigs. The Spanish flu, all the major epidemics we've had in flu started out as an avian flu and then came in through pigs into humans and became flu epidemics. This H5N1, the difference in this, it really started popping up 2 years ago, was it's killing wild birds. And we'd never seen that before. We probably lost over 20 eagles in the last year to avian influenza. So it's something we have to be concerned about, continue to be monitored, and be prepared for the next crisis. Also, our biggest mortality of bald eagles is flying into things. You'd think, this thing's got an eyesight 8 times what we can, and it flies into things. If anybody's been in a small plane and looking down, you realize wires, things disappear. You cannot see it. And their style of flight, which is rise up in the wind column, dive, basically tacking like a sailboat would do, it's on that dive where they would cross. A bird with a 7-foot wingspan hits wires, it will flip, the second wing or the other wing catches the next wire, and it's electrocution. But they just fly into things. And the more elevated structures we put into the environment, the air column is a major habitat of birds and bats. The more things we put up into that, the more risk there is. And this is an example of Altamont Pass out in California, where there's been major mortality in raptors at the wind farm there. And we, a few years ago, had our first bald eagle killed by a wind turbine here in Ohio, right up the road in Bowling Green. And those are small turbines compared to what's going up now. So we're just increasing that risk of mortality. This, I'm not sure really how well it really shows up on the screen if all the lights in here. This is a view from a radar, avian radar, that was done a few years ago. We had an avian radar unit by USGS brought into where our banding station was. This is a nocturnal migration. You can see all those blue lines. That's birds passing through the air. There are birds everywhere in migration, massive numbers. So, the air column is extremely important, and there is no protections for the air column. So the future really depends on us to really make wise decisions and see that what we went through in the past 40 years doesn't have to be done again. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kim to kind of move on with the bigger picture.
Good morning, everyone. What a blessing it is for us to be here today. I want to thank Marcia for the invitation and President Fell for this opportunity. And I want to thank Premier Bank, too. As a nonprofit, sponsors make everything we do possible. So thank you, Craig, for being here and for all that you do to support the community and community education. So this is going to be a very quick romp through a big event and a little bit more about what we do at Black Swamp Bird Observatory. We're going to focus on spring songbird migration because spring songbird migration is knocking on our door right now. It'll be here before we know it. But I want to take a moment to talk about Black Swamp Bird Observatory and what we do. The Bird Observatory is a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Oak Harbor, right up on the lake shore, roughly between the cities of Toledo and Sandusky. And in addition to hosting the biggest birding festival in the country, we have been studying songbird migration in that region for more than 30 years. Every day during spring and fall migration, our scientists are out working side by side with community scientists, volunteers who come out and give of their time to study bird migration. We know so much about how birds are using the landscape, the timing of bird migration, so this research is vitally important to the region's bird conservation efforts. And I'm very proud of our focus on youth education. We have got to keep kids connected to nature. We have to embrace the fact that kids spend a lot of their lives on devices, but at some level we have to disconnect them from that and keep them connected to nature because they will be the stewards of habitat conservation for the future. We bring thousands of students out into the marsh working side by side with our scientists. They're amazing programs, and we offer those at no charge to schools. The Bird Observatory is also a major advocate for songbird habitat conservation, addressing some of the greatest and most controversial threats to birds like outdoor cats, wind turbines, and building collisions. I'm not going to go into any detail about that in my talk, but I would be happy to answer questions about those things in the Q&A. But for the purpose of this presentation, I want to talk about the biggest week in American birding because it'll be here before we know it. This is a 10-day festival that takes place in early spring and early May. It's timed to coincide with the peak of songbird migration, and this event brings together people from all over the world in what has become this incredibly joyful experience, and we're going to dive into that. So the biggest week transforms Northwest Ohio, and we're going to focus on this boardwalk at McGee Marsh Wildlife Area. Have any of you ever been to McGee Marsh, to the boardwalk? Wow, that's a lot of you. So you know how amazing this boardwalk is. It's about a mile-long loop that goes through incredible habitat right on the lakeshore. It's the kind of habitat that migratory birds really need. It's forested habitat right on the lake. So this is what the boardwalk might look like if you visit on any given day in June or July or August. But this is what that boardwalk looks like any given day in early May. Now, for those of you who aren't really into crowds, I can understand that this might be a little off-putting. But this is what happens when a really good bird shows up along the boardwalk. It brings people together in excitement and joy in a way that's just the most amazing thing to experience. Some people call these crowds. I call these bird snuggles, where we all just get together and snuggle to share birds. The camaraderie that just infuses this event, it's just a fun, amazing experience for everyone that's there. But I want to dig into this a little bit more and ask the question, why are so many birders here? And that might seem simple, that there are a lot of birds, but there's so much more nuance that's worth discussing. And the first thing is, of course, they're the birds, but it's these warblers. This is a family of birds called warblers. They're small, they're very colorful, they weigh less than an ounce. They sing beautiful songs. Everywhere else in a warbler's life cycle, they're in the treetops and they're dispersed out over wide areas in Central and South America on their wintering grounds and then in their breeding grounds in Canada and Alaska. But when they're stopping over in Northwest Ohio on migration, they're concentrated down together, and on that McGee Marsh boardwalk, we can immerse people in spring migration. In fact, you can see warblers so closely that people take selfies with warblers on the McGee Marsh boardwalk. So warblers are really the star of the show, even though more than 300 species, different species of birds have been documented in that area. So why are all the birds here? I think we skipped a slide here. The first thing is this McGee Marsh boardwalk effect. And again, this boardwalk not only allows people to access spring migration and to be immersed in it, but it protects the habitat too. It keeps birders confined to this one walkway, and all the other habitat is safe. Some of the other nuances are that the timing of spring migration that comes through the area, the peak of it happens before the full leaf out. This is changing a little bit as the climate warms, but typically you don't have all the leaves out and you can see the birds really well. It's early enough in the season that we avoid all of the biting insects like mosquitoes and flies, and some of the other areas where you can see big numbers of migrants, like the Gulf Coast of Texas, let's just say that's not the case. It's not around the time of biting flies and mosquitoes. They can be really terrible there. And by the time the birds get to our latitude, it's close enough to the breeding season that the males are singing. So you have this wonderful natural symphony of sound that surrounds you when they're out there, particularly in the morning. As the sun comes up over Lake Erie and the birds start to sing, it's just one of the most beautiful experiences. Let's talk a little bit more about why the birds are here. The first thing is obviously migration. Many of these birds are birds that spend the winter in Central and South America, but this is where it sounds more like science fiction than fact. So while we're sleeping on any given night in spring and fall migration, one of the most amazing natural spectacles on the planet is happening right over our head, and most people are never aware of it. These little songbirds migrate at night. There are a lot of theories about why that's true. There are fewer predators, the air temperatures are cooler, but the way they navigate is really astonishing. They navigate using celestial navigation. These birds hatch out with the route hardwired in their brain. The adults don't show the birds the way. They just instinctively know when to migrate and where to migrate. Scientists have taken migratory birds and put them in planetariums and rearranged the star patterns, and no matter what they do, the birds still orient north and south at the appropriate time during migration. Isn't that astonishing? The other reason is Lake Erie. If you are a tiny migratory bird that weighs less than an ounce and you don't swim or even float, you are very reluctant to cross large bodies of water unless you're at your energetic best. So the birds, as they're coming along at night, they see Lake Erie as a barrier and they drop down to rest and feed and refuel. And this is what they refuel on. These are mostly insectivores. They're eating insects. And the beauty of the natural world is that this is a little aquatic insect called a midge. Do you guys get mayflies down here in Findlay in the mayfly season? That's a Lake Erie specialty. Aren't we lucky? This is very similar to a mayfly, but they're much smaller. And the peak of this aquatic insect hatch times to coincide with the peak of songbird migration. So it creates this natural bonanza of food. So the birds are oblivious to people. They're just feeding, resting up, and refuel to make this next stop on their journey. The next thing is this funneling effect. So in spring migration, migrants are taking generally 3 routes moving north to their breeding grounds. The first is on a westerly front. These are the small birds that don't want to cross the Gulf of Mexico, so they'll skirt the Gulf of Mexico. The second group, we call these the trans-Gulf migrants. These are birds that might weigh 8.5 grams, not ounces, but grams. They power right across the Gulf of Mexico. It's about an 18-hour flight. The third route will take those birds up over the Antilles, over Cuba, and up the eastern seaboard. But look what happens over northwest Ohio. All 3 of those routes converge, so it brings us big numbers of birds and this wonderful diversity of different species. So that's the first phase of the funneling effect. Unfortunately, when the birds get to the lakeshore, much of that forested habitat has been developed. So there are only these small remaining patches of good habitat for birds left. So the birds get funneled into these areas. Now that's tough if you're a migratory bird, but if you're a birder, when you look closely at these areas, these are public areas. They're state wildlife areas, U.S. Fish and Wildlife properties, or parks, which means birders have access to the places where the birds are concentrated. So it gives us the opportunity to connect people with spring migration in a really powerful way. And it's a lot of birders. Each year, more than 90,000 people travel to Northwest Ohio just to look at the birds while they're here. To date, we've had people registered for the festival from every state, more than 50 countries, and 6 continents. Now, if any of you know a resident of Antarctica, even if it's a temporary resident, and you can encourage them to register for our festival, we'd be so grateful so that I can start to say every continent and not just 6. So far, Antarctica is the only continent not represented in registration. And the economic impact, the business of birding, is really important to us because that's what opens the door to conversations with community leaders and elected officials about the economic value of habitat conservation. So we put in a lot of effort after the event to send out a post-event economic impact and travel study. We want to know where people stayed, how long they stayed, but most importantly, how much money did you spend while you were in Ohio on gas, food, shopping, and lodging? And the first year that we did this analysis in 2016, we were stunned at the figures. At that point, about 70,000 people were coming to Northwest Ohio. It was an annual economic impact of more than $40 million. $40 million pumped into the local economy. The detail of this is important. This happens what had typically been the shoulder season for tourism. In other words, the off season, the slow season. So our little bird observatory has created a birding tourism industry that simply didn't exist before we started the biggest week. And we love birds, we love Northwest Ohio. To have those things come together to do something so meaningful to the region is really important to us. So we talked a lot about the business of birding, but I don't want to miss this opportunity to talk to you about the joyfulness of it. We can argue about all kinds of things, but we all have to agree that we can never have enough joy in our lives, right? And getting outside and looking at birds is so good for you. It's good for your health. The Alzheimer's Association recommends birding as something that's good for brain health. It gets you outside, breathing fresh air. It's trying to follow the birds with the binoculars. Everything about it is good for you. And the biggest week offers so many opportunities for things like that. These birds are so beautiful, they're colorful, they sing amazing songs. They're so intensely alive that they fuel that curiosity that we have. They keep us young. They keep us energized. And I hope all of you, whether you are an experienced birder, you've never gone birding before, I hope that you will get out and try birding this spring. And I just want to touch on one particular bird, because as you advance in your birding and you get to know these birds, it's not just that they're beautiful, but the things they do can be absolutely astonishing. And we're going to shift from warblers to a slightly larger bird. This is the bar-tailed godwit. This is a big, robust shorebird. The bar-tailed godwit isn't typically found in Ohio, but some of its cousins are. And what this bird does in migration is worth talking about. So bar-tailed godwits breed on Arctic coasts and tundra, mainly in the Old World, and winter in coastal areas in temperate and tropical regions of the Old World and of Australia and New Zealand. The migration of the Alaska population is the longest known nonstop flight of any bird, and the longest journey without pausing to feed by any animal in the world. The bar-tailed godwit makes a 6,800, that's 6,800-mile fall migration from Alaska to New Zealand in one continuous flight with no stopovers to rest or refuel. They fly for approximately 8 days, without stopping, 192 hours, the equivalent of a human running at 43.5 miles an hour for more than 7 days. And this is where it gets really wild. It's worth noting that this bird's journey far exceeds any man-made flying device. The current world record for continual flight held by an unmanned aerial vehicle is 82 hours, half that of the bar-tailed godwit. And that's with the aid of external solar energy, so they kind of cheat. Along the way, the birds sleep while they fly by shutting down half of their brain at one time. It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? They burn up huge stores of fat, more than 50% of their body weight on this journey, and that's that they pack on before leaving Alaska. They'll more than double their body weight. Now get this. They increase flight efficiency further during this long flight by getting rid of digestive organs. They metabolize their own organs that they don't need during flight, and they regenerate those once they reach their destination. It's through atrophy. They do this during the long flights to reduce body weight that isn't needed for the journey. And during those long flights, even flight muscles are partially consumed. And why they do that isn't exactly known. Maybe it's for maintenance of muscles or muscle repair during this long flight, but we do know it's fine-tuned to declining power requirements, so the whole bird gets successively lighter as it gets more and more tired through this journey. Isn't that the most incredible thing? This is happening around us. This is happening out in the world, and so many people aren't aware of it. So I try to think of myself as a birding ambassador, just trying to share the magic of birds and bird migration. And if you're intrigued at all, there's no better opportunity to learn about birding or come meet birders from all over the world than during the biggest week. It's 10 days of activities that include field trips, some of them free. Whether you're a beginning birder or a seasoned expert, there's something for you. Our keynote speakers this year, if you've heard of the book The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan is a birder, and she's our featured banquet speaker this year. She's coming to the biggest week. She's written a book about birds. Everybody is a birder, they just don't know it yet. But if you can't get to the biggest week, please promise me that you'll at least get out somewhere. I grew up in Cary. Hancock County parks are fabulous. There are tons of opportunity to get out and go birding right here. If you have a few trees in your backyard, chances are that you've had a warbler in your own backyard. So wherever you go birding, please go out and try it this spring. And if we can help in any way, reach out to us at Black Swamp. We would be happy to take you out birding this spring. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kim and Mark. This is fascinating. Yeah, I already have learned so many new things, like that last bird. I don't think I'd ever even heard of that bird before, let alone that all the different details. I mean, to think of traveling, how many days it goes?
8 days on the wing.
Wow. Most of us think a car ride of 3 or 4 hours, particularly, if there are children in the car, that's long.
That's true. They don't have to deal with kids in the back seat, so there is that.
Wonder how they are with the little birds traveling along with them. So I have a few questions to get us started, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So with both of you, and I know your paths are different, but can you give us just a sentence or two on how did you first become interested in ornithology?
Actually, this comes from my family. We always were. My father actually went to school for wildlife, didn't get into the profession, but always had that interest, and it was just something about birds that were special to me. And so I knew when I went to college that's what I wanted to be, and just continued right on through. So it's just been, I can't think of a time when I wasn't interested in birds and wildlife and nature.
Kim?
Well, I don't want to start from my birth, but I grew up in Cary.
Just highlight.
That's the snapshot. I grew up on a little farm outside of Cary, and quite frankly, we didn't have a lot of resources, so there were limited opportunities for a person like me. And in my late 20s, I was at an appointment in Cary. I was outside all the time. I was of the area where your parents had to yell at you to come back in the house rather than go outside. But somehow, I just failed to connect with the diversity of birds. So I was at this appointment, and right outside was this bird feeder. It was in the summer. So every perch had this beautiful golden summer American goldfinch. And I thought, what in the world are these birds? So I asked the lady at the counter, and she said, well, those are goldfinches. They're everywhere. They're very common. And the entire course of my life honestly changed in that moment. I thought, if these beautiful birds have been around me all my life, what else is out there? And I've been on a quest ever since to answer that question. So everything changed for me in my late 20s just by meeting those little American goldfinches.
So you shared with us the joy of birding, the economic impact, but are there any other reasons why we really should care about birds?
Absolutely. This is very technical, but just in the most practical terms, birds perform important ecosystem resources for us. They disperse seeds. They control the insect populations and keep those things in balance. Oftentimes, they're indicator species, that canary in the coal mine, of telling us how healthy the environment is around us. So even if you have no interest in pursuing a career in birding or bird watching, we should all be tuned in and aware of the health of birds and habitat conservation. It matters to every person in this room, in this county, on this planet, the health of bird populations and the habitat they need.
Great, thanks. So we have just a few students with us this morning because they are not known to be early birds. Right back at you, Ken. But we do have several faculty with us. And our largest major here is animal science. And I think we'd all be interested in what types of potential careers might there be in the birding world?
It's a lot more vast than people really realize. It's highly competitive, as really any science can be. I was really surprised to find out just how strong Finley's animal science was. I admit I wasn't aware of that, and it's really impressive.
We try to do education 2 ways, right?
Yeah. But there's so many different parts of the field to get into. When I think of it from the scientific side of things, kind of the side I kind of come from, there's research and then there's management, and they are a little different, and they have different requirements in educational and some of the backgrounds. We always kind of kidded, I was in the research branch of the Division of Wildlife. I was the head of wetland research for the state of Ohio. Is that we actually got to play with the animals. Those managers in the management part of it played with the habitat for the animals. And they loved working on our projects because they got to handle birds or mammals, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of different roles, especially when you think of the animal science part. I think the general thought is it has to do with domestic type animals, but that background you get there prepare you for all. And in today's world, with all the different threats that we have coming toward us, whether it be contaminant issues or disease issues, quite often it's the wild animals that are where things are going to show up the first. So there is a growing component to jobs of being in that part of the field. Whether it's in veterinary school, more vets are now getting involved. We're actually doing stuff with wild birds, wild animals, where it used to be kind of stayed away from some of that. So there is increasing potential there. The other part that may or may not really be of much interest to anybody is if you really like math. Because statistics are extremely important now, because we don't work with populations for the most part. In wildlife, that's the biggest problem. We don't know what truth is, because we don't know what really is out there. It's not like a laboratory situation where, it's this or this. So you're always working with some sample, and quite often it's a sample of a sample. And so having a good mathematical and statistical background, understanding how to interpret what you're finding out, is an important part of it, any educational thing as you're going through. And I think we had many different students that were interning with us at the Division of Wildlife that I think what their thoughts were when they got into it ended up being a lot different after spending some time in the field. It's not Wild Kingdom and it's not Walt Disney. It's hard work. And so those that said, this is okay, they're going to make it. Because if that just isn't quite, you're more interested in how much you're going to make, because you're not going to make money in the wildlife field. You might want to be looking at doing something else and then using your spare time to be a birder or something like that.
The Division of Wildlife doesn't want to hire you to be their recruiter, Mark. I would just add, this is sort of at least tangentially related, that something we found is in the biological fields of, people that are interested in doing field research, this isn't always the case, but many times it's that people don't have an intense desire to interact with people. But whatever field you're going into, particularly animal scientists, at least taking a course in public speaking can make you, it can really lend itself to your success. I'll use this as an opportunity to say, Katie, I'm sure you're going to be an outstanding occupational therapist, but you're a wonderful public speaker, and it was a pleasure hearing that. So you're a perfect example of being able to communicate whatever it is you're doing in a compelling way is so important. I think every field should be required to take at least one course in public speaking.
I am sure that our Dean of College of Arts and Humanities is loving hearing what you just said. So another question, and then we're going to open it up. So as the climate has, ever so slightly modified and started to change, I saw about a year ago, I was attending a presentation where some folks with Master Gardening were showing over the last 25 years in Hancock County, the slight temperature modification and how that has changed planting and blooming. And it was very interesting. I'm wondering, with birds, have you seen that in terms of whether migratory patterns, what they're eating, anything like that? What are you seeing?
I think right now we don't have a long enough time frame to really see that, but we can see things happening. The misconception with what climate's going to change is going to do with migratory birds is it's going to affect the migration timing of birds. That is ingrained over centuries of time. They do adapt, they do change. That's part of what we've been studying for so long, is that migration occurs over a larger time frame, but you have the core. The main portion of the population comes through at a certain time. As things warm up and, April becomes more like, or March becomes more like April and April like May, what's really going to be happening to these birds, their timing isn't going to change, not to a major amount. Some of the short distance migrants, a lot of birds are maybe winter in southern U.S. and come up. They know when we have 70-degree days in March because they're having the same thing in Georgia. And they may start moving a little bit. But a bird in Costa Rica or Colombia, South America, they have no idea. Day length drives migration, and it's to the millisecond that they can pick up on. So it's going to be a slow time frame for migration to change. And this occurs in centuries. We're looking for it to happen in a decade. Can they adapt? The problem is going to be, and what we're seeing, isn't that the birds are going to change. They're not in the time scale they need to. But as Kim mentioned on her one slide, those midges, they're going to come out earlier because the water warms up, and that's what drives them. So they're going to be disjunct from the birds coming through. So food may be of a major problem. Now, given enough time, those extremes of migration timing for each species, they will become the norm. Because the birds that come early are risking surviving weather. If they survive it, they're great because they get the breeding ground first, they get the best spots. But they generally get caught somewhere. And that's where your core becomes the important part of migration. But as that core changes, it's will there be enough time for this to occur? So it's going to be, birds they have wings. So a bird that maybe normally nests in northern Ohio, in another decade it'll be nesting in northern Michigan and then Ontario. The Arctic birds have a problem because they've got nowhere to go. But the other things are mammals, are amphibians, reptiles. They can't move. That's where the real danger is. Birds are just kind of like, the canary in the mine shaft. They're something we can see easily. That's why I think people like looking birds. It's easy to see. I go out and try to, on any trip, and find a mink, or an otter. They're around, but you don't see them. But you can go see warblers. So that's what gets people interested. So it's all the other biota that makes this world what it is that are going to be seeing these major changes. And, so all we can do is use birds. I think the bird group may be the last to really show change because they've got wings.
The one thing we do know, though, Marcia, is that bird populations in general are in very steep decline, some at a very troubling rate. And as storms increase and become more extreme and the birds are facing more intense challenges as they migrate up from the tropics, those trans-Gulf migrants, that 18-hour flight becomes much more tumultuous and perilous for those birds. So there's a massive network of organization and entities studying bird populations. It's a challenging thing to do, as you might imagine, but we do know that many birds are in trouble, and that's partly contributing to that.
Thank you. That is all very, very interesting and good for us to know. Well, we're going to open it up for a few questions. Doreen has a microphone. Dr. Sears.
Thank you. We were told, I believe, that the eagle is one of the most protected birds in the world. I think there are 3 laws, you said, protecting it. and eagles are killed by these wind turbines. Are the wind turbine operators held legally liable and responsible for those deaths?
Well, how much time do we have here?
They technically can be, but in reality, generally they aren't even found because there's no one out checking. The one in Bowling Green was actually seen striking. There was an investigation, federal investigation. You never really hear the results of that. But most likely because it was what they call an incidental take, which can be permitted, is I believe they were requested, the company, I guess it's the city of Bowling Green, to acquire a take permit. Now, whether there was any actual fines or anything, we don't know. There has been a couple major fines out west where there's been some major eagle kills, California, Wyoming. But right now, the atmosphere for compliance and enforcement is not very good. And it really makes the conservation hard.
Next question. Lou.
Hi, Lou.
I've noticed when I've been up along McGee and Ottawa, the abundance of the white pelicans. Can you speak to why there's so many? I mean, one day it looked, you couldn't even hardly see the dirt. It was just all white.
As recently as a decade ago, if we saw a pelican on the lake shore of Lake Erie, we would have probably driven our cars off the road into the lake. We are seeing that bird's range expansion happen right before our eyes. What it's contributed to, we can't really say. Oftentimes, it's that the population is doing well enough that the young are dispersing out further and further. But I think the jury is still out on what exactly is driving this population, but they are clearly doing very well. We went from seeing a few white pelicans to seeing flocks of 200 or 300 now. So more birds are coming into the region, but last year was the first official documentation of that bird successfully breeding in the U.S. Great Lakes. So we're going to be seeing more white pelicans, this gigantic dinosaur of a bird on the lakeshore. It still stuns me every time I see one. I'm still not over it.
Just a little adding, back in the 40s and 50s, the white pelican was very common in Lake Erie. They were another species that were taken out by the contaminant issues. So they were basically taken out of the Great Lakes entirely. They came back into Green Bay region really in the late 90s. They actually started nesting on the Canadian islands about 7-8 years ago, East Sister, Middle Sister. So that's when we started seeing coming back. So it's been this natural expansion. There could be some of the most recent stuff I've seen could be the same effect that occurred for the double-crested cormorant, which also was a bird that was common here until the contaminant 50s and 60s and 70s. They came back in the early 90s to nest in Lake Erie to the point where, depending on who you are, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, because the numbers have grown up so much. But a lot of what fueled their recovery, and I think maybe fueling the white pelican as well, is winter survival. A lot of it has to do with the catfish farming in the South. It makes food much easier. So there's a higher survival rate of these species in the winter. So you don't have that winter kill every year that slows down growth. So there's several things playing there, but they are definitely back and making a good recovery. But again, it comes back to that contaminant of the 50s and 60s, silent spring.
So interesting. We'll take one more question right over here. Ann?
Yep. Thank you. I really appreciate the talk and all that you told us about. And I just back up a little bit. Got hired by the university in 1979. Never planned to live in Ohio, but it was a great job. And those have been around a while. What they're talking about actually is Crane Creek State Park that some of us knew. Our kids went up there, and it's now McGee Marsh. And going back before that nice boardwalk, when there wasn't a boardwalk in the early 80s, the habitat and the birds that was being affected by that. So I think it's just wonderful that good decisions are made through the years, because putting in the boardwalk is what made that still an area people could go. And people are good people up there. They don't leave the boardwalk, they stay on it. So yeah, there's just great things. And Howard Marsh up there, that we're helping the wetlands population that way. So what I would say to you is, do you see some negatives from the number of people? So I was up at McGee, Ottawa, Howard on Saturday, and I kind of like it quiet. Is there anything that's at all disturbing or anything that's being done just to kind of make the crowds manageable?
I'll take this one because this is something, marketing that area is something that's I'm really passionate about. And I joke about the bird snuggles, but I know that it's a big question in people's minds. Are the crowds, are they loving the place to death? And the answer for the birds specifically is no. In fact, in all the years I've been birding on the boardwalk, and this is strictly anecdotal, there's no published paper about this, but what I've seen happen is that the birds start to concentrate along the boardwalk because as people are moving through there, they're stirring up insects. So the birds are taking advantage of the people stirring up insects, and they are so driven by instinct. I don't want you to think of birds as little machines, because they're certainly not, but they're so driven by instinct to fuel up and get across the lake. The birds are not impacted at all by people. And you made that connection so well that we have a lot of federal funding and a lot of state funding for habitat restoration right now, particularly wetlands, as we struggle with the algal blooms on Lake Erie, which is fantastic. It's something we've been advocating for years. But when we can combine access to that restored habitat for the public through boardwalks, trails that give them a designated area to go, then everybody wins. It pumps money into the area. Elected officials love that. It creates jobs. So when any chance that we have, I mean, birds need refuges for sure, places where there aren't people, and those places certainly exist. But on public areas, when we can give birders and photographers and just wildlife enthusiasts of any kind access, then it makes a huge difference. So nothing particularly negative at all, except that it is adding to the demand on the resources. The Division of Wildlife's budget has increased because they have to put more porta-johns, if I can be very frank with you. So if that's a negative, that would be the only thing that I could think of.
Thank you. By the way, your question, Ann, makes me think that the headquarters of Birding Week is actually at Maumee Bay State Park. So know that that is where kind of like the entrance and the takeoff point, et cetera. And that brings me to, we're working with Director Mertz of Ohio Department of Natural Resources right now in the hope that we can schedule her yet this spring, or if not, very early fall, because it's the 75th anniversary of Ohio's state parks. And there's a new one about to open in a few weeks, actually, the 76th one, and we want to have her come and talk about all of that. And I'm sure she will also make reference to Birding Week and the observatory and all the good things happening up there as well. So stay tuned for that. I do want to remind you of the next Fridays at Findlay that President Fell told you about, April 19th. Brian Nash, one of our own, and I've had the good fortune of getting to know Brian a little bit, and I will tell you his background at Ingredient is fascinating. For many years, he was responsible for all of the spices that are grown around the world that get marketed to the various companies that you all have in your spice cabinet, and making sure that each country where those spices are grown were meeting with the safety guidelines and laws for all the different countries where Ingredient markets to. So no small task, right? And he now is responsible for all their global sustainability for, again, they grow, I don't even remember in how many different countries, but it's huge. And so he has vast knowledge. And so he is going to come and share some of that with us, and we're very excited about that. Also, where is Madeline? Madeline or Tiffany? You want to remind everybody what's the big day coming up? On? March 21st. Okay, so that's what President Fell was saying. Everybody gets a chance to participate. So we want 100% participation from everybody here in the room today. And if you noticed on your tables, now these are not binoculars, so don't take these to birding week, but these are our eclipse glasses that Ohio Logistics is making possible so that everybody can participate safely, protect your eyes on, what's the day of the big eclipse? April 8th. And there are activities here on campus, there are activities all around Hancock County. This, providing that it's not a cloudy, rainy day, it is going to be a great day to see the eclipse. So we thank our good friend Chuck Bills and the Ohio Logistics folks for these. Take a pair of glasses with you. And tonight, you'll want to come back here to Weinbrenner because what night is it, President Fell?
International Night.
Yes, International Night. And we have about 400 international students here at University of Findlay. They will be singing, dancing. There will be food from a variety of countries that you get to sample. And you can come. I happened to hear on my drive-in this morning, I had WFIN on, and Chris Oakes was doing an interview about it with Alex Parker, and gosh, you'll definitely want to come back tonight. So I just want to ask you to once again join me in thanking our incredible speakers this morning. I'll tell you, if you Google either one of them or both, you are going to realize what a treat you had, and for them to come as they are preparing for their busy seasons. We deeply appreciate it and hope everybody goes up. I will be up there one day that hopefully is a dry day, so because birding when it's pouring down rain is not my favorite. But on a dry day during birding week, I will be there. So thanks again for coming. Thanks to our sponsor, Premier Bank, and make it a great day.